Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Steve Johnson, and I want to welcome all of you to the graduate short-term counseling class at CIU question and answer over the very first lecture in the course, the topic of which was an introduction to REBT. We have a lot of different people that may be on here, some from around the world, and some will be students in the class and others not students. And so I just want to say that for the students, I'm willing to take any question whatsoever that has to do with the content of the first lecture, any questions that you may have, and to not homework assignments. For homework assignments, please just email me, and that's the best way to handle that. Do that through Canvas. To ask a question this evening, all you need to do is just use the chat feature and ask your question. So I will open this up. However, I did in the post on Facebook and in my course, I did say that I would take questions, and I did receive about 6 different questions over the content in the first lecture, and so I will be covering those in addition to any questions that you have. But I want those of you who are on, I want to give you first dibs at asking a question. So if you have one, please just use the chat feature and ask your question, please. Okay. So again, if you want to ask a question, just use the chat feature, and then I will ask them as they come up. If nobody has one to begin with, then I'll begin to look at those that were posed to me through email as I had requested or made available. Okay. So right now it looks like no one has posed a question or a comment through the chat feature. So let me just cover the first question that somebody asked, and that is, what is the real difference between the activating event within REBT and the critical activating event? So let me give some background to that. If you haven't, if you're not on top of the reading or you haven't watched that video yet, in REBT, we have what's called the ABC model, where the A stands for an activating event, some situation or an event that has happened and to which we have either an emotional or a behavioral response. So it's a significant event. And so that is the A. So when we look at the A, for some individuals, they call that the activating event. Other individuals call it an adversity. I don't care either way. It just means some event that is significant to the individual. However, the activating event can be fairly general. And often within the activating event, there is a part of that activating event, part of that situation or that event that is most relevant to the individual's emotional or behavioral response. And let me give you an example. Let's say that I want to buy a birthday gift for a really close friend or family member. I purchase it. It is the day of the birthday. I'm going to the birthday party and I cannot find the event, and I get really, really anxious about it. So if I said, what is the activating event? They might say that, I'm going to the birthday party and I can't find the gift. However, if the person is bringing that situation into therapy, I might say, what is it about purchasing that event and the party is about to come up, you can't find the gift? What is the most significant part that is leading to your anxiety or whatever they're feeling about that? And they might say, well, I'm really worried about how they're going to respond to me in that situation. So the actual activating event is not so much the situation, but how others may respond in the birthday party if you show up without that gift. So that is really the critical activating event, because that is most relevant to any emotional disturbance that the individual may have. And it is very important when we are trying to assess what's going on with the client. They're coming in to see us, not to get some general activating event, but the very specific one, because that will help us to identify the specific emotions, the specific thoughts they may be having, the beliefs, etc. And it might help us make sense out of their behaviors and those emotions. So really, really important to get the critical activating event. Again, if you have any more questions about that, I'm more than happy to address that. Somebody might say, well, how do I get that? Well, I would ask the client. I mean, that's the only way to know what part of the activating event is most relevant to whatever, and name the emotion that they say, or their behavior. Okay. For example, in this situation, the behavior might be they just want to avoid the birthday party. So that's a dysfunctional behavioral response that they may be having, or they're anticipating. So really important to get that critical activating event. Again, anybody that came on a little bit late, if you do have a question, feel free. There's no such thing as a silly question. So just ask it in the chat feature, and then I will definitely respond to it. The second question that a student posed is, what is the difference between an inference and a belief? Now, for my students, I just want you to know that that first lecture is just a total, really big outline of the content of the entire course. So I do not expect you in this first week to really have a handle on everything that I covered in that first lecture. It's kind of like an advanced organizer. So you go, oh, okay, now I know what topics are going to be covered in this course, or kind of like an outline of the topics covered in the course. I did go into each of those topics, but not in any great depth. In fact, for this issue of the difference between an inference and belief and how do we determine that, we're going to have a whole lecture on that. And so if it's not fully clear for you right now, don't worry, because we will be covering that in great detail. But since somebody asked it, let me just make the distinction in a brief way. I'm not going to go into great detail. First, in the ABC model, this would be the part that we would call the B. Now, the B stands for belief, but really, it doesn't just stand for belief. It stands for any kind of cognition. Cognition is just one of those psychological jargon terms that we use to refer to thinking, a thought. And so in REBT, we really kind of emphasize two different kinds of thoughts. One of those kinds of thoughts is an inference, and the other one is a belief. Now, what are they inferences about, and what are they beliefs about? They're about the activating event or the critical activating event. So there's some situation, and the individual has a cognition or a thought, and specifically either an inference or belief about that particular event. Okay. So now, what is the difference between the inference and the belief? Again, both are cognitions, both are just types of thoughts, but they're quite different. An inference is the kind of thought or kind of cognition that gives meaning to that situation, that activating event or critical activating event. It gives meaning to it, or we would say it attributes meaning to the situation. Another way to look at that is that the inference is an interpretation of the event. Let me give some examples of an inference in just a situation that I gave, the activating event. Like, I bought a gift for someone close to me. I'm ready to go to the party and I can't find the gift. And maybe I'm anxious about it, or I'm worried, or whatever. And so the inference might be, oh man, they're going to think I'm an idiot. That's the meaning they're giving to that situation. Or they may say, oh no, this means that I'm going to be the only one there and I'm just going to look stupid. Okay, that's the inference that they give. That's the meaning that they're giving to the situation. Okay. Now, let's go over to belief. Again, a belief is a kind of cognition or a kind of thought that is important. It does not attribute meaning to the situation, and it is not an interpretation of the situation. Instead, what it does is it is an evaluation of the situation. So, an example in that particular situation, the evaluation might be, oh, this is horrible that I can't find the gift. This is terrible. I can't stand this. I'm such an idiot, right? Um, this will be, this is really going to make my life really complicated. So, and that would be horrible. And so notice those are evaluations. They're not meaning that is attributed to the situation. They're evaluations of goodness, badness, rightness, wrongness, those kinds of things. So why is this important? It is important in REBT, as we will lecture on later, but file it away. If you forget it, don't worry, because we're going to be covering it in another week. That is, we say that the emotion that the individual experiences is much more caused by the belief than the inference. So it's not so much the meaning that you give to the situation, although that is highly relevant, of course, but it is the evaluation of it. So, and we'll look at that and the relationship between inferences and beliefs much later in the course, particularly in preparation for something that we call the conceptualization of the motion, which I mentioned in that first lecture, but I didn't go into great depth. Again, if you have any question, feel free to just use the chat feature and let me know. So let me go to, if none, then let me go to the third question that someone emailed to me. And that is, doesn't the activating event or the situation actually cause emotions at some level? Well, this is really, really a good question. And the answer is not a totally simple one. I think the best way to look at this is that the activating event or the situation sets the stage for an emotion, but it doesn't cause the emotion. If it did, if we had 10 people in the same situation, they would all have to have the same emotion if the situation caused the emotion. But clearly, we can have a lot different people in the very experiencing the very same situation, and they have vastly different emotional responses. Okay, let's say I know at the university, if someone gets an F on the exam, a student gets an F on the exam, some are just, can get really depressed about it. Some don't get depressed. They may get highly anxious about it. Some might just laugh it off and go, oh, well, it's so they don't have much of an emotion at all. Some might even be happy because their parents wanted them in the university and they don't want to be there. And so if they fail, that would be good ammunition not to be able to not to have to stay at the university. So same situation, but given the values and the goals of these individuals, the situation, the emotional and even the behavioral response may be quite different. So the situation is relevant. I mean, without the situation, we wouldn't have any emotions at all, right? But it is a step toward the emotion, but it is not the direct cause of the emotion. Similarly, the inference is an even bigger step toward the emotion, but it doesn't directly cause the emotion. And the reason is individual could have the same inference, but different beliefs about it, right? So the inference is, I'm going to fail this exam, okay? And that's the meaning that we're giving to the situation. They haven't even taken the exam yet, but they're predicting I'm going to fail. That's the meaning they're giving to the situation. And so one person might say, oh, I shouldn't fail it. I must not fail that and have that demand. And so then they get really emotional about it. Another one might say, oh my God, that would be terrible. That would be horrible. That would be awful if I failed it. So they might have a lot of anxiety about it. Another one says, I couldn't stand it. I absolutely could not stand it if if I got an F on it. Or others might globally rate themselves. They would say, oh, what a loser I would be if I failed. Or others might not evaluate themselves. They might evaluate me as the professor. They go, what a jerk that gave such, who I know is just going to give this really impossible exam. So, they might tend to be angry at me. That might be their emotional response. Others might say, this whole world of academia is just horrible. It is cutthroat, it's competitive, and doesn't prepare us for life. So there's that kind of belief. And so they might have emotions around that. So you see, they all share the same event, the same inference that they are going to fail, but they have different beliefs. And so their emotional responses is different. That's why we would say that the activating event is a step in the direction of the emotion. It doesn't directly cause the emotion. Inference is a larger step toward the emotion. So we would say it's more of a contributing cause, but it's not the proximate cause. It's not the closest cause. And then we would say the belief would be the closest or the most significant contributing factor to the emotion. So I hope that shows the relationships among the activating event, the inference, and the beliefs in terms of their impact upon the emotion. Again, we will be going over that numerous times throughout the course. So if it doesn't fully make sense to you, don't get nervous about that now. Okay. Again, I want to encourage you that if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to just type in a question, and I'm happy to do that. The fourth question that someone posed was, aren't emotions such as anxiety and depression normal? Well, absolutely. Absolutely, they're normal. Any emotion we have is normal. They're not abnormal. We're humans, and we humans have emotional responses to things. So that's quite normal. Simply because you get angry at something doesn't mean you're abnormal. Simply you get anxious or depressed does not make you abnormal. Those are not abnormal emotions. And so in REBT, we probably don't spend, we don't spend a lot of time talking about whether an emotion is normal or not normal, right? Because most emotions are going to be normal. What we like to look at is, are they helpful? Is a particular emotion in a situation helpful? Helpful in what way? Is it helpful to you, that emotion that you have? Is it helpful for you to reach the goals that you want to attain? Most likely, an unhelpful emotion, it's like anxiety or depression or something like that, is not going to help you reaching your goals. In fact, they're going to get in the way. Think about it. If you have a big exam coming up and you are so anxious you can't even sleep and you can't study very well, that anxiety is normal. It's not helpful for you to reach your goal of doing well on that exam. So I hope that helps you. So um, someone might say, but this event was really, really negative. Isn't it normal for the person to have this really strong negative response? Absolutely. But that's not the issue. The issue is it helpful for them? And we always determine the helpfulness not based upon the event, but based upon, does that emotional response help the individual or hinder the individual in attaining their desired goal in that particular situation. So I hope that is helpful. That's a really, really really good question. So another question, since I don't have any here, I mean, we have a kind of a quiet group here tonight. Another question was, how is the conceptualization of emotion relevant to creating a treatment plan? Now, keep in mind, I absolutely did say that, but it's going to be a few weeks before that's going to make sense to you. Remember that in the conceptualization of emotion, and I'm just going to say that again, I don't expect you to know that right now, but we will have a whole lecture on the conceptualization of emotion, so don't worry about it. But it does help. It is really helpful when you learn how to do the conceptualization of emotion to help you develop some kind of plan to treat that individual or help that individual. When we're talking about a plan to help the individual, we call that a treatment plan. Okay, so um, so it really gets down to what are the parts of the conceptualization of an emotion. There are three parts. And again, we will learn this in great detail. This will become second nature to you. One, we're going to learn what the inference is about the situation that gives, and that emotion. What's the inference? Two, what are the beliefs about the situation? And three, what is the action or the behavior that is associated with that emotion? Okay. So let's take that same example. I bought a gift to give to a friend or a loved one, and I'm going to the birthday party and I can't find the gift. So we know that's the activating event. I can't find it, and people may think I'm silly or a space case or whatever that is. So if I want to do a conceptualization of emotion, and let's say the emotion is anxiety, then I want to know what inference, what meaning, or what interpretation did that client give to that situation, right? And so we know that with anxiety, the inference is that it's a threat in some way. Again, we'll learn all of that. So the threat here would be what? How others would look at them, whether that would be a threat to their self-esteem. Okay, so that's a threat. And then the look at the beliefs, we would say, is there any kind of demand? Oh, I should not have done that. So part of the conceptualization would be to identify the presence of any dysfunctional belief, the demandingness and awfulizing or catastrophizing, or believing that I can't stand it, it's too much, or global negative rating of myself or somebody else or life or world or all any of those things. So conceptualization of emotion first would be about getting the inference, right? For that particular emotion, which is anxiety, get the beliefs that are causing the anxiety. And thirdly, what is the action? What is the most likely action or behavior that the individual will have? Well, we know that in anxiety, that the most common behavior will be avoidance. So it would make perfect sense that if the individual is anxious about how people will respond to them going to the birthday party without a gift, that they probably are thinking, well, maybe I won't go, I won't go to the birthday party. That would be avoidance, right? It's not helpful, but that's that's the most likely scenario. So we would get the inference, we would get all the relevant beliefs, and we would identify the action potential. Why is that relevant? Because if I know the meaning that they're giving to the situation, I can help the client maybe give different possible meanings there that might be more helpful to them. If they have really unhelpful beliefs, then maybe I can help them, adopt more helpful beliefs. And then instead of avoidance, I might help them, instead of avoiding, to go to the party and try to have a good time and do all of those kinds of things. Okay. So that I would have them take a step into overcoming the anxiety, right? So that's what I mean by the conceptualization of emotion helps us to develop a treatment plan, a provisional one, an initial one with a particular client. Okay. And then the last question that someone posed was, and this is a really good one, and I did not cover this in the first lecture, but it's still a good question, and that is, how does a therapist who uses or a counselor who's using REBT validate someone's emotions? Excellent question. And I think part of this hinges on what do we mean by validating someone's emotion. I might validate their emotion by saying, look, whatever emotion you have, it is perfectly normal. You are not abnormal for having the emotion that you're having. So I would validate that way. And I would say, but I would not validate and say it is good that you have that emotion or that is a helpful emotion. I am not going to do that because that may not be true. While I will validate that they have the emotion, it is normal for them to have the emotion, I will not validate that it is helpful. Okay, because it may not be helpful. And if I validate that, I'm reinforcing their adoption of dysfunctional behaviors and dysfunctional beliefs that are going to cause that client to have those kind of dysfunctional emotions in those given situations. Okay. So again, the other way that we validate it is that we show that we unconditionally accept our client no matter what kind of emotion that they have. If they're angry, if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're depressed, if they're hurt, if they're jealous, we're going to accept them just as they are and help them to create a plan so that they have more adaptive helpful emotions and behaviors so that they better reach their goals in life, whatever those goals are, whether those goals are personal goals, whether they're interpersonal goals vis-a-vis their loved ones or their colleagues at work or school or whatever. It could be their professional goals. It could be educational goals, or it could be their spiritual goals. Maybe it impacts their goals, to exemplify particular values of love and honesty, etc. And their values. So we want to show unconditional acceptance for them and validate at that level, but we don't want to validate that a negative, dysfunctional emotion or behavior is helpful. We won't go there. And in fact, some therapists will go too far and just validate on YouTube and in my class so that people who were not here for the full time or who weren't here at all will be able to watch this. And I will be posting the day and time for next week when I have a similar question and answer period. And I hope all will come back for that. Thank you and have wonderful whatever is the remainder of your day. Goodbye. Bye-bye.